Well, good evening to each and every one of you, and welcome to another edition of Bible Study, Word Up on Wednesdays, whatever you want to call it. It's good for us to be in the number one more time. Grab your Bible, turn with me to Ruth chapter 1. Today we're looking at verses 14 through 22. While you're doing that, hopefully you should have received your study guide by now. You are able to download it off of our Facebook page. And hopefully by the end of the month into February, if you have submitted your information to our membership database, you'll be able to receive it via email or text so that you can follow along with us in our time of study. While you are gathering your study materials, don't forget that I am reading through the New King James Version, sometimes the NIV version, along with, if we're doing Old Testament study, I take the Jewish Study Bible and I kind of go through that as well. So whichever version you have, you should be able to follow along in some kind of way. Why are you doing that? Let me say welcome to our guest, whoever you are, wherever you are. We are so grateful to have you in the virtual sanctuary of the St. John's Congregational Church, located 45 Hancock Street in the beautiful city, cold city of Springfield, Massachusetts. So thank you so much for joining us today, either on Facebook, YouTube, or on our website. Let's pray together. God, I thank you for this day. I thank you for our time of study. I pray that you would bless those who are logging on now, those who will watch this when this broadcast has ended. I pray your blessings upon us in Jesus' name. Amen. We are journeying through this study entitled Better Together, building intergenerational relationships. And this week we're looking at verses 14 through 22 of Ruth chapter 1. Let me give a recap for those of you who may not have had the chance to look at this Bible study last week, and you're just now tuning in. We're dealing with this term called intergenerational. In fact, it's a close term to me at this point in my life as I am doing some doctoral work around this term intergenerational, and it simply means the ties that are formed between individuals or groups of different ages. It is the ties that are formed between individuals or groups of different ages. It involves doing the work that is necessary to being intentional about bridging the gap between different generations. And this, as I stated last week, is vital for the success and sustainability of anything that involves multiple people. So intergenerationality is really the exchanges and interactions between generations and the mutual impact that they have on each other. It's really taking multiple generations from builders, those who were born 1945 or before, to this term Generation Alpha, those who were born in 2010 and after. It's taking those multiple generations and bringing them together, and they're doing life together, doing community together, learning from one another, exchanging information and experiences with one another. And in church, that is very important. It is very important because we need each other. Every generation is important, and every generation can learn from the next generation. And what I wanted to do is take some biblical examples of intergenerationality. And one of those examples we're looking at is coming from the book of Ruth. And it's the relationship that forms between Ruth and her mother-in-law, Naomi. It starts off really, really rocky. That relationship starts off really rocky, but at the end, we know that they work together to complete a certain task. Ruth marries Boaz, and the story goes on and on. We looked at how to study the Bible some time ago, and so our limit tonight is verses 14 through 22. We're looking at verses 14 through 22. We are still in the Old Testament. We're still in the Old Testament, which means that our literature is, in a sense, our language, rather, in a sense, is Hebraic. We are in the historical section. Ruth, the book of Ruth, is a part of the 12 books of history. So that's the literature. Our limit, we're looking at verses 14 through 22. Our literature is the historical section. Ruth lies right in between the historical section and the Pentateuch. The language is Hebrew. And the location started off in a town called Bethlehem. They started off in a town called Bethlehem. Bethlehem, as we looked at last week, means house of bread. Judah, Bethlehem of Judah, if you wanted to use its formal name, Bethlehem of Judah, the term Judah means praise. They live, or they are from Naomi, her family, which consists of her husband Elimelech, her two children, Mahlon and Chilion. They are from Bethlehem, but they moved from Bethlehem to a place called Moab. They moved from Bethlehem to a place called Moab. Moab means from the Father. Moab means from the Father, and it is the name given to the grandson of Lot. And you'll find that in Genesis chapter 19, verse 37. Genesis chapter 19, verse 37. So we have a family of four: Elimelech, Naomi, Mahlon, Chilion. For those of you who were not with us on last week, Elimelech's name means my God is king. It's Hebrew for my God is king. Naomi, her name means pleasant one. Mahlon means diseased or sickly. And Chilion, his name means destruction. So Elimelech, my God is king. Naomi, pleasant one. Chilion means destruction. Mahlon means disease. The two sons marry two Moabite women by the name of Ruth and Orpah. Ruth and Orpah. Orpah's name, in a sense, would mean back of the neck. Ruth's name means friendship. Ruth's name means friendship. They're living in Moab at this time because there is a famine in Bethlehem. Famine had arisen in Bethlehem. We looked at this last week that it could have been because of three reasons. It could have been a material famine, of course, meaning that they were dealing with a food shortage. Maybe it was because of the demand was much greater than the supply, meaning that there were more people than product. Maybe there hadn't been enough rain during the planting season to produce a harvest. We do not know why there is a literal material famine. We also came up with this, that it could be a moral famine as well. That while they are dealing with the lack of food and the lack of substance, it's also a moral famine, meaning that there is a lack of spirituality somewhere. There is no coincidence that Ruth is placed where it is in the Bible, seeing that in our canon, Ruth is placed after the book of Judges. Ruth's story takes place during that season, during the time when the judges ruled. There was no king in the land, and in a sense, the people did as they saw fit in their own eyes. It was a lack of morality. It was a lack of sensibility. In fact, in a sense, there was a lack of spirituality. It could have also been a providential famine, meaning that this famine was caused by God. Their lack of food could have been caused by God because of their lack of morality. So they relocate from Bethlehem to Moab. There in Moab, the two sons, Mahlon and Chilion, marry Moabite women, Ruth and Orpah. But there are some losses. We looked at this last week. Naomi's husband, Elimelech, dies first. Following his death, Mahlon and Chilion die. She's left in Moab, literally by herself. Naomi is there, husband gone, 2 sons are gone, and all she has left is a memory. All she has left is a memory of her loved ones and her 2 daughters-in-law. Because of this loss, she's bitter. She's grieving. She's dealt with a matter that no one should probably have to deal with. She's lost 3 people that she cared for. She hears that some way and somehow God has restored to Bethlehem bread and food, and she decides that she's going to leave Moab and return back to Bethlehem. Following her are her 2 daughter-in-laws, her 2 daughters-in-law. Ruth and Orpah decide to follow their mother-in-law. Naomi says, no, stay right where you are. In fact, we looked last week that in verses 8 through 9 and verses 11 through 13, there is this discharge of association. She offers them this discharge of association, tells them there is no need for you to come behind me. She asks that God would bless them, restore to them everything that they have given up for the sake of being with her. And she prays that they are able to find rest or security in their new husband's household. So she prays that God would allow them to remarry, that God would bless them and restore everything that they lended to her while they were with her, while she lived in Moab during the time of the loss of her sons and husband. And she says, stay, go back home, find love again, remarry, do life. Don't wait for me. Go back home. But yet they continue to go after her. So where we are in verse 14 through 22 is the rest of this story. She's telling them, y'all go home. And what you will discover in this text, in this one chapter, there are 3 types of widows. There are 3 types of widows right here. The first we have is Naomi, and she would be viewed as a grieving widow. Now I hear you, Pass, aren't all of them grieving? Of course, all of them are grieving, but who's really dealing with it the most? Naomi's dealing with it because she's lost her husband. Then she lost her children, her 2 sons. Now, while Ruth and Orpah are grieving as well, their grief is not like Naomi's grief. She's grieving to the 3rd degree. She's lost the love of her life, but then she lost the 2 beings that God blessed her to nurture and care for. She's literally lost parts of her, if not all of her. She tells her daughters-in-law to return back to Moab because she's too old to have children. And if she did, they would not be willing to wait until her sons became of age. Now, she says to them, listen, y'all do not need to follow me. Go home. Go home. Go be in Moab. Live life the way you want to live it. Do not follow after me. And she tells them why. She says, because, listen, I'm not going to allow you all to be with me, knowing that I cannot give you anything other than my love for you. That's all I have. I can't produce any more children. And if by chance I could, how long are you willing to wait for them? I would not let you wait until you all would be too old to want to wait for my sons to grow up. Now, behind this plea, if you're writing notes, behind this plea is the thought of what Deuteronomy chapter 25 verses 5 through 6 gives us, and it is the law of levirate marriage. Levirate, levirate marriage. Levirate, levirate marriage. And what Deuteronomy 25 says or suggests is that according to this law, if a man dies without issue, his brother was to take the widow, marry the widow, and raise up a son in honor of the deceased brother. That's what levirate marriage is. That if a man died and he had a brother, that brother's responsibility, according to this law in Deuteronomy 25, was that he would take on his brother's widow, wife, marry her, give her a son, and raise that son up in honor of the deceased brother. This is Bible for you. If you ever read Genesis chapter 38, there's a story about a man named Onan, O-N-A-N, Onan. And Onan's responsibility was to marry his brother's wife, give her a son, and raise that son up in honor of his deceased brother. He doesn't do it. The Bible tells us that instead, he wastes the seed on the ground. And I'm going to let you fill that in on your own term because I may have kids watching. He wastes the seed on the ground. And because he did not follow this law, God killed him. That's in Genesis 38. If you don't believe me, read it for yourself. It's in Genesis 38. And that's behind Naomi's plea. If only one of the sons had died, let's say if only Milan had died, then it would have been Kilion's responsibility to not only be married to whichever wife he was married to, but he was to take on his sister-in-law, marry her, and let her produce a son, and they would raise that son up in honor of the dead brother. Because Naomi does not have any more children and cannot have any more children, levirate marriage is thrown out of the window. So she says, I can't even allow y'all to follow after the law of our custom because I can't give you any more children. She's grieving. She's a grieving widow. Because she's grieving, she's telling them, listen, I don't want y'all to follow behind me. Go back home, live your life, do whatever you want to do. And because out of that, you have this second widow, and that's Orpah. And Orpah is the leaving widow. Orpah is the leaving widow. Look at verse 14. Then they lifted up their voices and wept again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law. She kissed her mother-in-law. Now, this term kissing and embracing them was not only a form of greeting, but it was also a way of exiting, leaving. The Bible tells us that literally she went away. She said, all right, I'm going to obey your words and I'm going to leave. But then you have the third widow, and that's Ruth, and she is the cleaving widow. So you've got three widows. You've got Naomi, who's a grieving widow. You've got Orpah, who is the leaving widow. But then you have Ruth, who is the cleaving widow. She clung to her. Watch verse 14. They lifted up their voices and wept again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. Let me see what the Jewish Study Bible says. Then they broke into weeping again. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law farewell, but Ruth clung to her. So three types of widows. Naomi, is the grieving widow. Ruth is the cleaving widow. Orpah is the leaving widow. So 3 types of widows. Orpah gone. She's out the picture. And some people like to argue that she was wrong for leaving. No, she wasn't. No. She was not wrong, nor was she selfish. She was obeying what her mother-in-law told her to do. And in reality, let's think about it. Would you stay? Would you stay? Would you do what Ruth did? Let's be honest. Most of us, nah. We're going back. We're going to do what, we need to do, make life the best for us. We're going to deal with the grief on our own, and we're just going to, try to move on. Ruth in verse 15 shows us, or rather in the text in verse 15, there is Naomi's resistance. Ruth is clinging on to her, and Naomi is resisting. Look at verse 15. So she said, that's Naomi being, see, your sister-in-law has returned to her people and her gods. Go follow your sister-in-law. That's Naomi's resistance. Don't stay with me. Now, I don't want us to look at this as Naomi being this deep, dismissive woman, because I also think this displays her concern for Ruth, for not allowing Ruth to endure what she sees as God's hand in her tragedy. Because though Naomi is prepared to accept whatever is going to happen to her, she's a genuine mother and says, listen, I don't want you to bear what I'm having to bear. You're too young. I don't want you to have to live life the way I'm living life because of how I've been dealt to live with life now. So I don't want us to just think that Naomi's resistance is out of a lack of concern or compassion, or she just really doesn't care and she doesn't want to be bothered. She's this old, for the lack of better terms, this old, bitter woman. No, I think it's displaying that she knows that the road ahead is a difficult road, and she doesn't want Ruth to have to live through that. But what Naomi misses is that just because the road is difficult ahead doesn't mean that you got to be on the road by yourself. You don't have to do life by yourself. I mean, I just really think I need to throw that out there, because I think a lot of us, even those who are watching right now, beyond this intergenerational thing, I think a lot of us think that we have to just do life by ourselves, and you don't. You don't have to do life by yourself, especially if you've got people who are willing to do it with you. If you've got people in your life who are willing to go through the trenches with you, that speaks volumes of the kind of people you have surrounded yourselves by. Naomi is pushing against it. And it's not because she's just like, I don't want to do this with nobody. No. It's because that's all she knows right now. She's lost her husband, lost her children. She's lonely. She feels alone, and she doesn't want anyone else to have to endure what she is enduring. But though Naomi is resistant, verses 16 through 18 shows us how Ruth is so persistent. You got Ruth's persistence in verses 16, 17, 18. So in verse 15, we got Naomi's resistance, but 16, 17, 18, we've got Ruth's persistence. In essence, these verses show us Ruth says, don't push me to leave, because what can Moab do for me? What can Moab do for me that Bethlehem can't? Naomi is so bitter about what has happened, and she has every right to feel this way, that she's not really seeing what's going on. Something good is coming out of this, and it doesn't involve Naomi really offering Ruth anything materialistic. I shared with you last week that this is just not a beautiful love story of how Ruth met her Boaz. No, but it is really involving, watch this, two things. It's a story involving, well, honestly, three things almost in a sense. It's a story that is involving connection and conversion. Connection and conversion. Here's how it's involving connection and conversion. Two things are taking place. By Ruth being persistent and not letting go of going after or with Naomi, it's showing connection. It's showing that there is something about Naomi that Ruth feels like she needs to connect herself with. It's connection. It's really the forming of relationship. That's connection. But it's also conversion. There is a conversion taking place when Ruth says to Naomi in verses 16 and 17 what she is willing to do in order to not have to stay in Moab and to go behind Naomi. Verses 16 and 17 are the best known lines in this entire book. They express loyalty, devotion, and a commitment to developing an intergenerational relationship. Ruth is young. Naomi is seasoned. She's older. And yet there is something about Naomi that Ruth says, I've got to go with you. I've got to develop this relationship. Now, I want to argue that the reason why this connection and conversion is going to take place is because it is something that Ruth has witnessed through the life of Naomi before this point that causes her to want to stay with her. I'm going to say it one more time. It is something that Ruth has witnessed in the life or through the life of Naomi before the grief that has caused her to want to stay, which helps us to see something about intergenerationality. And that is, intergenerational relationships are groomed at times by what is seen by the other generation. Sometimes the connectivity with generations is because of what someone has seen the other do, which means, if you don't know it by now, somebody is always watching. On Sunday alone, Sunday evening, when we had the MLK service, someone was stopping me to talk about how, they appreciated or saw the bow tie that I was wearing. And I was sharing with someone that, I picked it up from how I watched my granddaddy and my father dress, and they dressed like that. And it was just something that I wanted to mimic. I learned how to tie a bow tie, not no pre-tied bow ties, but I tied them myself. And it was because it's what I watched the men who I admire, that's what I watched them do. I picked up on that. I think some of the reasons why that I was able to connect probably with my grandfather a lot was not because he raised me, but because I saw in him the things that I wanted to be. Besides, I didn't want to be a cab driver. My granddad owned a cab company in Rocky Mountain, and I didn't want to be a cab driver. I was a preacher. He drove me around. Those are things that he did. I didn't want to be a cab driver, but he was always dressed. I mean, he smelled good. That was my love for cologne and all of that. He took me to the barber shop every week, and it was because of what I saw. And that was how our relationship, me being a kid with this 70-year-old man, it was what I saw. I watched him. And I think the lack of intergenerational relationships is based upon the fact that maybe, especially in my generation, we just don't like what we see. We don't like what we see with maybe some of the people generations before. But it was something, y'all, that Ruth witnessed through Naomi that caused her to want to stay. Here's what she says. This conversion, remember what's going on. Ruth is from Moab, meaning she's a part of another culture. Naomi is this Jewish woman, so she's a part of another culture. However, look at what Ruth says she's willing to do just to stay with Naomi. Verse 16, she is willing to commit to a new land. She's willing to follow Naomi wherever Naomi goes, and she's willing to leave Moab behind forever and follow Naomi to Bethlehem. Look at what she says in verse 16. But Ruth says, entreat me not to leave you or to turn back from following after you, for wherever you go, I will go. And wherever you lodge, I will lodge. She's willing to commit to new land. She's willing to commit to new leadership. I know we don't really like this term, but she's really submitting herself under the guidance of Naomi. She's willing to submit to Naomi and allow Naomi to guide her. She commits to new lifestyle. Ruth is willing to give up all of the old ways of Moab and conform to new life and to the way people live wherever Naomi is going. She's literally ready to make a drastic change. So she commits to new land. She commits to new leadership. She commits to new lifestyle. She also, verse 16, commits to a new lineage. Your people, she says, shall be my people. I mean, Ruth says, listen, I will go through extreme measures to cut all ties with Moab, and I will be a part of the nation which I have married into. She's ready to claim new people. I don't know how bad it was in Moab, but Moab ain't playing. That's not where she want to be. She was like, listen, if you're not going to stay here, I don't want to stay here either. I'm ready to go. So she commits to new land. She commits to new leadership. She commits to new lifestyle. She commits to new lineage. Here's conversion, church. Even though this term is not even there, this is conversion. She says, I'm willing to commit to a new Lord. Watch what she says. And your God, right there, verse 16, will be my God. And I think this is the greatest statement Ruth could have ever made, because she's willing to give up this polytheistic way of living, because in Moab they serve multiple gods, and follow after this mono God, this one God. She's willing to follow after Naomi's God. And this is really her declaration of faith. I am willing to convert from my land, leadership, lifestyle, lineage, Lord, to wherever you want me to go and whatever you want me to do. Now, can I be honest? Can I really be honest? If Naomi lived in the 21st century, she could have easily manipulated Ruth. I always like seeing different things in the text, and that is so different. You're probably saying, where in the world could you find that from? Think about this. This girl is saying, I am giving up everything that I know or have known to follow after you, and you direct my path. You take me wherever you want me to go. Naomi could have easily taken advantage of Ruth, because there are a lot of people who build relationships with people not for the right reasons. Let's think about that. I'm gonna let you think about that. They only do it because they know that they can get something from them and do all of that wonderful things, wonderful stuff. But that's not what comes out of this. She commits to new land, she commits to new leadership, new lifestyle, new lineage, new Lord, and she commits with no limits. Watch what she says in verse 17. Where you die, I'm gonna die. And there I will be buried. And watch this. The Lord do so to me, and much more also, if anything but death parts you and me. This is almost in terms of wedding vows. Till death do us part. In fact, in the Jewish Study Bible, in the annotated notes on the side, this term where she says, where you die, I will die, and there I'll be buried. Thus and more may the Lord do to me, if anything but death parts me from you. She's really suggesting that the only way we will be detached is in death. That's the only thing that's going to separate me from you. Death. She says, I'm committed to new land, leadership, lifestyle, lineage, Lord, with no limits. And I'm going to tell you how committed I am. I'm asking God to invoke a curse upon my life if anything but death comes between this commitment that I made with you. This is intergenerationality at its starting point. Ruth is willing to learn from the experiences of Naomi. And watch this. They are forced to do life together. They are forced to do life together, to live in community together. And watch verse 18. Naomi is still resistant. Watch what she does. When Naomi saw how determined she was to go with her, she ceased to argue with her, and the two went on until they reached Bethlehem. Some translations says it this way, that she stopped speaking to her. Now this woman is going to give up her whole life for you, and you so bitter and angry, and you're grieving, and I get it. And grief brings out sometimes the worst things in us. But yet you don't have to do life alone, Naomi. And yet you're going to still treat this girl like this. Now, what happens is she doesn't urge her to leave anymore, but she doesn't urge her to stay with her either. They just start walking. They started walking. And what it's showing me is that Naomi's internal battle and internal grief and internal bitterness was going to make her lose out on building a relationship with the one that she needs. Watch this. Naomi, you can't give Ruth any sons, but Ruth can give you grandsons. You're too old to even, you being a widow, going back to Bethlehem would mean that you would probably, in a sense, live in poverty, which is another strike against you, because in ancient biblical times, women were considered not even second class, but lower class. And now she's a widow, she's even lower. And because she's a widow, she's poor, so that drops her down to the lowest point. Ruth coming along with her, she will be able to do some things that Naomi cannot do. And yet, child, she is saying, I don't want you to go with me. Leave me alone. She stops speaking to her. So let's look at it, and I'm almost finished. Look at verses 19 through 22, because while they're on this journey, let's look at the arrival to Bethlehem. It's a quiet journey, y'all. It's a silent journey, and it probably took between 7 to 10 days for them to leave from Moab to get to Jerusalem. 7 to 10 days, if one translation is right, of silence. Now, I understand moments of silence. In fact, though I'm your pastor, though you may see that I'm talkative, I can do a whole Bible study with nobody in here talking to myself, that I can talk. But there are moments when I don't want to talk. I can go all day without talking to myself. I can go all day. But 7 to 10 days of complete silence with somebody with you, that's a lot. That's a lot. She does not speak to her. They arrive in Bethlehem, and when they arrive, they know they go back because there's been word that God has visited the people and have given them bread. And to Naomi's surprise, verse 19, not only did people, after 10 years of being gone, not only did they remember her, but they rejoiced over her. Watch verse 19. I'm reading from the Jewish Study Bible. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole city buzzed with excitement over them. The women said, "Can this be Naomi?" Naomi had been gone for 10 years. Life had transpired. Things have happened 10 years. She lost her husband, lost her 2 sons. She's got this girl with her daughter-in-law who don't want to go. She's like stuck. And when she gets back, people not only remember her, but they rejoice over her. They are excited to see her. And then look at Naomi's declared attitude. So they arrive back to Bethlehem, but verses 20 through 21 gives us her declared attitude. She's bitter. And out of the events that life has yielded to her and that she's encountered over these years of living in Moab, she's bitter towards her daughter-in-law. She's bitter towards herself. And she's bitter towards others. And she's even bitter towards God. So she's bitter towards Ruth, towards herself, towards others, and towards God. Look at how bitter she is. When they say, "Could this be Naomi?" Look at verse 20. Don't call me Naomi. Don't call me Naomi. Call me Mara. Call me Mara. So, for recap, Naomi means pleasant one. What does Mara mean? I'm going to give you some time. What does Mara mean? What does Mara mean? What does Mara mean? If you have read in context, then you will clearly see that Mara means bitter. It means bitter. It means bitter. It means bitter. Mara means bitter. Now, this is not the first time we've seen this term, Mara. You remember in Exodus, they leave out of Egypt, they get to a place of Mara. It's bitter water. It's bitter. Her name means bitter. And she claims the reason, this is why I say that she is bitter towards God, because she claims, watch this, that the Almighty has done this to her. The Almighty has made my lot very bitter. The word Almighty, we have that in our translation, but in Hebrew, it's Shaddai. 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 That's what it means. It means Shaddai. Archaism. It's an ancient term for God. It's one of the terms for God. Shaddai. We'll really see this term throughout the book of Job, where he calls God the Almighty. Shaddai. Shaddai has made my life bitter. And she speaks of God's punishment in a sense. She says, watch this, through God's punishment, she says, I'm looking on the study guide to make sure it's up there. Yeah. She speaks about God's punishment and says, I left Bethlehem full, and now I'm returning empty. I went away, verse 21, full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. How can you call me Naomi when the Lord has dealt harshly with me, when Shaddai, the Almighty, has brought misfortune upon me? Can you see her grief? That's why I call she's a grieving widow. She's hurt. She's actually ticked off with God. She's ticked off with God, and she's ticked off with Ruth for not doing like Orpah and going back home. Let me deal with my own grief by myself. Don't call me Naomi. Call me Mara. I'm bitter. This is the diary of a mad black woman. She's hot. She's upset. She's grieving. But yet the people continue to call her Naomi. Look at verse 22. Thus Naomi returned from the country of Moab. She returned with her daughter-in-law Ruth the Moabite, and they arrived in Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. That's how it ends. They return to Bethlehem, not at a regular time, but they return during barley harvest. And there are three things about this, and then I'm done. Giving you this. This is Bible study. This is Bible study. There are three things about the barley harvest. The first thing is it's a time of blood. Barley harvest is a time of blood, and I'll deal with this in coming chapters. Barley harvest is a time of blood. The time of barley harvest was also the time for Passover. It was a time when the blood of the lamb was shed to commemorate the deliverance of God's people from Egypt. Y'all know that. So it's a time of blood. It's also a time of bounty. Bounty, a time of bounty. This was the time of the feast of the first fruits. You got your Bible or you're taking notes? That's found in Leviticus 23, verses 1 through 14. Yep, Leviticus 23, verse 1 through 14, where it's a time when the first of the barley harvest was offered in a wave offering before the Lord, and as an act of gratitude for the harvest that was about to be reaped. When the priest made this wave offering, he was saying that this was the first fruit and there was more on the way. You'll read that in Leviticus 23, verses 1 through 14. So it's a time of blood, it's a time of bounty, but barley harvest also signifies a time of beginning. It's a time for a fresh start. It's a time for a new season. And for Ruth and Naomi, it's a fresh start or a beginning of life together in Bethlehem. So they return to Bethlehem during this special moment. Barley harvest is a time of blood, bounty, and beginning. This is the start of their intergenerational relationship. And I can't wait to get into this some more throughout the week. So we'll look at chapter 2 on next week. I hope and pray that this lesson has been a blessing for you and to you. If you missed some things, go back and watch it in the replay, or hit me up, ask me some questions if you got them. Make sure you send me some emails, ask me some questions. I got you covered. And we will do what we can to make sure you know it, you know this story well. All right. Don't forget that if you have not submitted your membership form, I need them. We need them. We need them in our office. I think it'll appear on the screen, the number that you can text for membership. It's a simple number. If our media team, Brother Clarence, has been so patient and faithful with me, he may have it up. If not, I can't even remember the number by heart myself, but I know it's a 413 number. It's there. It might be showing up. Clarence is still looking for. He is behind the scenes, and we thank God for Clarence. If not, you can pick up a membership form here at the church office, write it out in paper, and you'll be good to go. There it is, 413-429 575. It's right there on the screen. Make sure you text that so that you can receive the form, fill it out, and we will have your information so that you can keep in contact with us and we can keep in contact with you. We are excited about worship coming up on Sunday. We will welcome to our sanctuary. We've had so many guests to come through this month, but on this coming Sunday, we'll welcome the members of Jack and Jill. They will be with us in our sanctuary. We've got some exciting things taking place. That on the 5th Sunday, it's Rep Your Team Sunday. So we're coming in with our jerseys on, favorite football or basketball, whichever you prefer to wear on the 5th Sunday. But then watch this, starting in February, and you'll hear this in the announcements, we got some exciting things about February too. So we're excited about what's about to take place. So listen, do all of those good things for us. Stay tuned. Don't forget, we're having a wonderful time. We had a wonderful time with our boomers. Even while this is going on, I'm meeting with our busters. And so that is exciting. And then we'll have our millennials in the next week. I think that's on Taco Tuesday, next Tuesday. And then finally, I wrap it up with Gen Z and Generation Alpha in that last session on next Saturday. All right. I love y'all. I'm praying for you always until we meet again next week. Have a wonderful week. I pray God's blessings be upon you. Peace.